This is Rock and Roll Grad School with your hosts, Heidi Hedquist and Luke Poling. All their favorite songs are slow and sad.
Hello, kiddies. We're going to have a real good time together because we've got a great guest. It's the beginning of our birthday month.
Yes.
And you don't need anything else.
No, that's really all anyone needs.
Mm-hmm. So I'm excited. I will be spending my birthday weekend partially in the company of our friend Keith from Chicago.
Yes.
So it's not Saturday. We won't be in a park, but I think it's still going to be memorable.
But I feel like that's all the better.
I know.
The Saturday in the park's not my thing.
I know. So this Friday, October 1st, is the release of our guest today's new record.
Yes, it is.
Synergy.
Right? She knew that she should release it on her birthday month.
Exactly. So Dar Williams is our guest today, a folk singer who, having grown up in New England, I feel like she is just ubiquitous. She's just like, any event I go to, it's like, oh, and Dar Williams will be singing. And I mean that in the best possible way, where you're like, all right, well, that's a check for that festival on the right side, right column. She's got a lovely new record.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a lovely talk.
Yeah, she's very cool. And even beyond New England, I think most people of our generation know who she is and her work and how fantastic she is. And she's a lot of fun too.
Right, which you don't normally associate with folk singers.
No, I think a lot of times they get a rap of being, I don't know, folksy.
Yeah.
But she gets it. She's super fun. She's super talented. Her music's gorgeous. And
it's a fun conversation.
It is. And it keeps up with our track record of really guests that are far above our.
We are way punching above our.
Yeah, we class. Are definitely dating out of our.
Yes. No, our show is nothing but is she really going out with him? Just come to life.
Right.
We got to get Joe Jackson on the show.
Really do.
Just for that reason.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I had this dream last night.
Yes.
It was somewhere in Boston, some sort of club. And my wife had bid on some sort of benefit thing where Springsteen would come and play sort of a private show for you and a few friends.
No, your wife's way cooler than the rest of us.
So it was Bruce and it was Patty. And then for some reasons, I don't completely understand, Max Weinberg had shown up. But one of the perks of this thing, and this was like a birthday gift, which is the perfect lead into birthday month.
Yes.
Was if Bruce will play one song in particular, if you say, I'd love you if you do this. So in my dream, I said, I would love for him to play Atlantic City.
Of course.
And then because I am me, and because I would do this in real life, I literally spent the rest of my dream going, Atlantic City? That's the one? You didn't ask for like Reason to Believe or The Wish. Atlantic City. He probably would play that anyway. So I woke up frustrated with myself in my dream.
This entire experience tracks for who you are.
I am afraid that is very, very true. Yes.
Time, be my friend. Though I have not been so kind to you.
How long have you been working on this? Is it something that you kind of pick away at over a long time, or is it you have your songs and you just go in and do it all at once?
Well, the pandemic allowed us to pick away at it, but it was actually in the can by March of 2020.
Okay. So in listening to it, there are a lot of songs where I hear I feel like a lot of your songs, the way you structure them, there are characters in them, but they're not necessarily, it's not like a Springsteen, someone's got a name and you know where they work and when they get off. And I feel like yours, there's a lot more shadows in all of that. And listening to this record, I felt like I heard references to things that have happened in the past year, but I was never sure enough that that's where you were going. Is that, are you trying to make these songs where people can find their own way into them, or are you hoping people follow where you're heading? If that makes any sense at all.
The songs did not come out of the pandemic.
Mhm.
None of them did. I've since written things, but and I don't tend to, I joke that my song that really had to do with 9/11 came out in 2011. So I tend to things tend to surface in their own poetic time. And early on, because the songs that I spent time with on their own terms, on my own terms, ended up being the ones that were the most successful, I almost became superstitious, like, I'll just do what I do and we'll see if that's what everybody else wants to do too. and so again, it's happening with this album. There are already songs that people are picking out, and I think, gosh, I almost didn't write this song because it felt a little obscure, or to this, to that, as we say.
Mhm.
So I wrote the songs that I wrote, and wasn't sure if they were timely or not.
I think that's something we've heard a fair amount, and it just goes back to how one of the beauties of music is that self-interpretation. Regardless of what the artist's story was and what made it so beautiful, we create as an audience member, create our own belief on it. So you can write a whole album prior to the pandemic and have people go, this is exactly what I felt in June of 2020. I know exactly what I was going through.
And then, we also have to give a little bit up to like the magic deity thing out there somehow. Agreed. Because the whole album is called I'll Meet You Here. And, during the pandemic, I started, I was like, I'm going to listen to a guided meditation. It's free. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try that. But somehow I sort of backed myself back into being, 21 years old, listening to a lot of Buddhist stuff. And I realized that in my life, when bad things happen, there's been this whole kind of like, yeah, of course that happened, because I'm the kind of person who can't do this, and I'm the kind of person who can't. That's my son slamming the door. Sorry. This happened because I didn't do what I was supposed to do, and the whole album is called I'll Meet You Here, and the whole feel of all of these songs is basically saying to myself, look, you didn't create climate change, Dar. You didn't mess everything up and do everything wrong. When something bad happens, you meet it. You have to meet it. And so I'm wondering if there was some prescient ESP part of me that knew I was going to tack down that part of my life and say, don't take it all so personally. Just, and don't call happiness happy, call happiness a lot of things, just coping. Yeah. and sure enough, all of the songs that are on the album have some aspect of that toolkit that the toolbox that we all had to take out over the last year. So there's that little piece of magic too. But then there's also, I do what I do, and people find me if it's helpful to them.
And in the past year, in spending time with these songs, probably in a way that you don't get to, or in a different way, at least, that you're sort of at home with them, did they change for you? Have they kind of changed what they mean to you and what you're trying to say?
That's a really good question. The songs that have the most to do with facing the present moment without a whole bunch of baggage, strapped up on my shoulders, are the ones that helped me the most during this year. There are some reassuring messages about, how we find our way out of paralysis, a certain kind of, I call it the no zone. What I figured out a few years ago, I thought, there's a time of day when I could give myself a really tough time, but I'm really just in the no zone. There's just nothing's going to happen. So why don't I just say I'm in the no zone, and then just put one fork in the dishwasher to break the spell and get out of the no zone. But there was a lot of that kind of, thinking during the pandemic, the kind of, how do we proceed? How do we make sense out of this day and the next day? So the overall message of the record came through for me. Yeah.
It's interesting. I feel like the past year for me has been a whole lot of that, where if I can get the fork in the dishwasher, I would be thrilled. And the great American novel, or whatever it was I was planning on conquering in the past 8 months. I said to my wife recently, I feel like now I'm really ready to pandemic. I figured it out now.
I know. You are not alone. I think that the year taught us how to have a year like that. And I was a little bit, I won't say that I had any big breakthroughs, but I knew the angst that we were all going to be up against, because I'm a freelancer. And there have been big chunks of time when I'm at home and I assume that I'm going to do this, but I really just, I don't know, stare at my hands and say, wow, 5 fingers, who thought of that? I know that just getting through the uncertainty of a given day when you're a freelancer is probably not going to be the fodder of the great American novel, and that really you're going to be spending a time figuring out how to organize your brain and time to start. And luckily, some people have been stepping up and saying, yeah, there's even a science to that. But many of us think, okay, I finally got, I got the basement cleaned out. So now I can do that thing in the basement that I thought I was going to be doing for that whole year, and its equivalents. So yeah, you're not alone. You're not alone. And I'm ready for another year, but I'm also ready for being out in the world. So that's exciting.
Certainly. And you're so close to getting out there and playing again and sharing these songs with folks. And also going back to your old catalog, which I'm assuming you probably don't sit around and listen to your old records a lot.
No, that's not me.
So it's got to be, I would think it'd be an interesting reaction or interaction with these songs that you haven't hung out with a while, to sort of reconnect with them and see how it's changed in the ensuing, year or so.
There is a very experiential piece of this, because I have been out playing outdoor concerts now, and it's, sometimes I think I could just be a brain in a jar. I put food in my body that's just fuel to just, think my next thought. So when I step up in front of an audience and there's all these parts of my body and my brain that remember this thing, and they say like remembering is like putting the members of your body back on, and it's really it's so it's such a nice thing. It's like, yeah, Dar, you were here, and it wasn't just a brain construct. You were here looking at lights and looking at families showing up together, and worrying about this or that detail back in the green room, and hoping that your shoes, that the strap that fell off your shoe last week that you kind of hastily glued back on isn't going to break it. Like that whole live in the moment improvising, and also going back to things that are familiar and how those weave together, has been so reassuring. Like, oh yeah, I was there. I did do this whole thing. And it's not just a nice thought. It's a whole body experience that I'm returning to. And I think the audience might have some feelings like that too.
Imagine. It had to feel surreal, yet like coming home the first time back on stage.
Yeah, it was so, I was trying to figure out, okay, what's a unique thought I'm having here? Because all I wanted to do was say what everybody else is saying, like, whoa, this is so cool. Right. And the one thing happened that was really interesting. I went up to Western Massachusetts, where I lived a long time ago. But I go back all the time to perform. My memories were to 20 years ago. They weren't to the last time I came. And I think that when there's that continuity, you're like, oh, the last time I was here, I did this set list and I had this sound guy. And I was suddenly remembering what it felt like to be beginning this entire career with all of the doubts and uncertainties ahead of me. And it was trippy. So, getting back into the whole swing of things somehow brought me back into a time traveling ripple that I did not expect. And that's worth the price of admission right there, to visit parts of your past with your present self. That was great.
And how have these new songs been interacting with the rest of the catalog? Do they play nicely, or are they
so badly? People hate them. No, I'm just kidding. They're going fine.
What are you doing?
I've been sifting them in, and I introduced them. Like, I had a song called The Ocean that was on my second album, and I played it. Like, there was this article about open mics. So here I am, and I've been touring all over the place, and I come back to this open mic and play a new song that I haven't sung before. And I sing the song called The Ocean, which I play all the time now, and people know it. It bombed. So I have learned that when you're introducing a new song, unless it's really self-explanatory, that it's good to just kind of let the audience know what's coming and kind of introduce it to the rest of the set list family formally. So I kind of intuitively do that. So far, so good.
It's hilarious. It's like bringing a significant other home for dinner for the first time with like all the parents and the grandparents and
exactly. And that they're all going to have, this grandparent has this issue, and
right.
this has this issue, and I have a song that's kind of about healing the planet, and you're like, oh, okay, I've got to make sure that's, I got to give that the bipartisan spin when I take this one to Kentucky, but I can just like let it all hang out when I'm in Eastern Massachusetts. So yeah, I've learned some of those things.
How much do you have to vary your set lists from region to region? I mean, granted, the folks coming to you in a more red state are probably more cool with what you're saying than others. It's sort of a self-selecting audience.
I'd hope.
Yeah, if anything, the people who come with that sort of exile status to my shows, not that I don't really wear my politics on my sleeves, although apparently I do, which is kind of interesting. Like, you don't even realize, but when people kind of come as the all those people with the coexist bumper stickers, and they show up at my shows, they like to meet each other and see who's out there and around, especially during election years. So I don't vary the set that much. I do like to be mindful of, which is a big pandemic word, mindful, people who've brought like a date who didn't want to come and doesn't share any ideological views, with anybody in the audience. And I just try to think how we can all find some common ground. But that's every show.
Yeah, I lived in Boston, grew up in Boston, and my wife and her former roommate always, she drove a Subaru Outback, and we said, you don't need to put a NPR sticker on. You kind of just, people know that you listen to NPR if you're driving that vehicle.
Yes.
I know, it's so much fun to see like a Trump sticker on a Prius. I'm like, you know what? Independent thinking, that's good, because it's like you still believe in perhaps anthropogenic climate change. That's that you took that step, and you also realize it's much cheaper, and it's a really sturdy car and not too expensive. So you figured that out, even though it is a brand on wheels in so many ways. So yeah, it's some of those songs, it's fun sometimes when you can let it all hang out. I mean, when you can really say something that the audience will agree with you, and you just say, I can say this, it's like being able to swear.
Right.
It's
like, we're safe here.
Yeah.
With my people.
Yeah.
Right.
How much do you feel your work as the songwriter is supposed to do that? Is supposed to sort of challenge people and say, well, have you thought about this? I know you've done work, writing about veganism and places to find while out on the road. how much do you see your role as an artist in society being, I got to point out stuff I think is completely ridiculous?
Okay. First of all, when I was 24, I did a directory of natural food stores. So I was a vegetarian, and I am now, but for a long time I was a carnivore, and it was really about finding good coffee, because the natural food stores really had good coffee.
They do. They still do.
I don't want to misdirect, but here's two things. One is, when you're writing a song, you're writing poetically. And so, I just wrote a book that's called Writing a Song That Matters, because I lead a songwriting retreat called Writing a Song That Matters. And one of the first things I write is to say, think about the word, what I'm looking at right now, umbrella. Think about what an umbrella does and how you use the umbrella. Now think about umbrella poetically. If I just say that, it's a shift of how you're going to look at that umbrella. And suddenly we think of, things that keep the rain away in our lives. Who is an umbrella? What do we, and that poetic thinking at certain times in history has been a political act, because there's so much, hyper driven consumerism and competition and power play stuff, that we don't take the time to kind of let these objects become poetic to us and to think poetically. So that's not a political stance, and that's not trying to win somebody over. That's trying to create a landscape where we can have more recognition of a shared way of looking at things, because poetic, like when I wrote a song called When I Was a Boy, it's just a reflection on gender. I'm not trying to get a law passed. I'm not trying to get policy passed. It's actually more a recognition of a common ground that hasn't found as much traction in the marketplace or the public square. But it's saying, we've got stuff about sexual orientation, we've got feminism, but then there's this other thing called like gender. And I'm going to sing about that with no prescription. I'm just going to notice this thing. So that, I think, is what music and singing does. It's not about winning people over. It's just maybe widening the circle of recognition.
I like that, which is ultimately, I think, what ultimately solves things.
Oh yeah. I think, when you lower the stakes, when you're just allowing yourself to be in a poetic space, that automatically allows for more interesting conversations.
How was that transition from writing songs to writing a book?
Well, I had written 2 young adult novels for Scholastic, so I knew that there would be a difference. But this time I was like, oh my gosh, writing songs is so much easier than this. This is so tough. And now that I'm writing songs again, I was like, writing a book was so much easier.
Right. Sounds right.
I don't have to sound good. I just have to get the information out. But when I was writing the information, I was like, oh, this information feels so dry. I mean, with a song, it's less words. So it was more like that. I enjoy all of it, I'm glad to have been encouraged by the editor at Scholastic to explore different avenues. It's really meaningful for me to not just be writing songs.
You're looking to do more of that going forward?
Well, I'm writing a young adult novel right now because I want to. So we'll see if anybody wants to publish it. And if I had to do, if I were going to write another book, I wrote something called What I Found in 1,000 Towns, which is like a thing about how I've watched towns being able to build themselves up without being all like huggy and kissy and let's all work together and weird culty like that, like how their garlic festivals and their library programming has really brought them up to the 21st century, really. If I were to write another thing, there's things that I would love to spend time writing about, like trauma in our country is really big. There are huge swaths of people who have trauma and they're very hard to communicate with. And it would be great if we really recognized how much people are not like here, aren't really with us. You know, they're really struggling. And I think that impacts life, you know, small town life and city life. And so there's all sorts of things that would be really interesting to write about, like the role of businesses in small towns. And but I don't think that's gonna happen. I think I'm gonna dither off into more songwriting for a while, and maybe this young adult novel too.
Obviously, everybody loves young adult novels at all ages, which is one of the beauties of the genre. But how do you figure out that line to know that it's just raunchy enough to hold, or, you know, compelling enough, not necessarily raunchy, but adult enough to hold everyone's attention and still not be too controversial for the original intended audience?
That's a really good question. I think, you know, there's a woman who is you know, it's the subject of the thing are women in their 20s, and one of them had a miscarriage, and she's saying, and she's a performer, and she's saying basically, you know, I have to, you know, with these radio stations, I can't talk about it with this because these radio stations and this, and then also I have sort of the backing of this church because that's the church I belong to, and I'm not even supposed to be having sex outside of marriage, and what a, you know, how awful, like this is, I can't talk about this because my record label won't let me do that. And I mean, that's such a weird reality, as they were saying about Simone Biles. There's the person, the sport, and the brand. There's like this trifecta, and that's what I find myself writing about, this sort of, where does the person, the profession, and the brand come together and splinter, and where do you just hide behind your brand sometime and then just live your life without worrying too much about telling the world about who you really are? And, you know, what is identity within that person, profession, brand, expectation, larger than life thing out there? So this person had a miscarriage, and people don't really talk about miscarriages. And so I wanted to put that out there, that she says that, like, I don't know who to talk to. There aren't as many support sites. And I thought, it's so important for me to put that information out there, to have characters who are that honest. And the good news is there's this thing out there. It's what my dad was as his profession. He was an editor. And ideally, you let it all hang out, and then you have an editor who has a better sense of the demographics. I wrote a musical, or, you know, the beginnings of a musical, where this guy turns into a butterfly. And I met somebody who writes for children, and she says, well, he's got to turn back into a human. And I said, no, she's just got to accept that he's a butterfly now. And she said, no, he has to turn into a human again. she explained the whole thing to me, and he did. And it was a huge help. And there was also a kiss at one point, and the people who were putting on the play said, this is for kids. They can't kiss. I'm sorry. They can't. It doesn't, I don't know why this is, but they can't. So ideally, there are some experts out there.
I saw you at the Newport Folk Festival a few years ago, and it was the year that you were all paying tribute to Pete Seeger, and I think it ended up being his last time to the festival. And I don't remember everyone who was in the group. I know it was you, and I know it was Ellis Paul, and you were talking a little bit about what it was like having Pete Seeger as a neighbor, going through some of your recycling and making sure everything was sorted properly.
Right.
And to kind of go back to what you were just saying about this idea of the human, the person, and the brand, I'm always fascinated by people who have interactions with these larger than life characters, and sort of trying to find out that thing about them that makes them all the more human and relatable. As someone who was fortunate enough to live near the Seeger family and interact with them, what was Pete and his wife like in your town, in your neighborhood?
You know, I think you just put your finger on something that I think is really important for us to know about some people. Sometimes a person and their profession and their brand are so interwoven from the get-go that you can't pull it off. I mean, and because Pete was so disdainful, of course, of people who had to, of a lot of different kinds of posturing and a lot of different kind of hype, and but at the same time, I mean, he was exactly what you thought. He showed up in a shirt and you're like, didn't I see you in that shirt 100 years ago? And he really did write songs while he was chopping wood. And I went up and visited him to learn a song. Because basically, if Pete asked you to do something, you just did it. So I went up to his house.
Of course.
and we were in his living room, and it looked like graduate school housing. There was a big spider plant, like draped all around the ceiling. There was a rag rug. There was a wood stove. We were on, couches and chairs, but there was, that were distressed. Totally comfortable, totally great. Toshi kind of coming in and out, going, oh, have fun, kids. And Pete digressing, pulling out a book, showing me something, explaining something about the song, being extremely kind and facilitating, teaching me the song and letting me really work on a harmony without getting impatient. All of those things that you would hope he was. And above us, there was kind of a mezzanine overlook thing with all of these file cabinets. And at any given time, 2 or 3 people were there. Just constant filing, constant pulling, constant filing. So the archives of his life and what that had been in the world were this little industry happening above us, like a meta, it was like a visual meta. And then there we were with the spider plant and the rag rug. And when I was moving into my house now that I'm in, I had this kind of like, gosh, do I look like a grown-up? Do I look like a grown-up? I was just taking all my friends' secondhand furniture, and I thought, well, there's Pete. And I felt so better because he was that guy who really, it was as if, he made this big thing of money and he goes, I'll take this much and the rest will go to the world. And that's how I try to be now, especially during the pandemic. I was like, how can I pare down and, maybe put some patches on the patches and really, homestead a little bit more here. And so he influenced all of us. And I'm suddenly realizing why I always felt self-conscious of his disdain for people who were so self-branding. And yet I never worried when I felt a little self-branding around him, because I just thought, I don't even think he'd notice. Like he's so genuinely himself. He just showed up wherever you asked him to show up. And you'd see him all over the place, and he'd be standing right next to you before he went on stage. And there was no pretense. And it did help a lot of us say, I could be like that. Why can't I be like that? Why can't we all be like that? So, and he was also very ideologically driven in terms of thinking, if we can find spaces and places to make music together and make food together and maybe make food and music together, we will be transformed into exactly who we want to be. And he lived that faith, which was a beautiful and a very refreshing thing to be a part of.
Hey there, polar bear, is quite a mess we found. Life is one heavy trip, our paws are sinking in the ground. I see you out lumbering at the break of dawn. How can we survive and save the day before the day is gone? Well,
I'll Meet You Here, the new album by Dar Williams, is available this Friday, October 1st, wherever you get your music. For more information and for tour dates, check out her website, darwilliams.com.
You can check us out on all the various socials. Be sure to visit our website at rockandrollgradschool.com, and don't forget to leave us a review.
Today's show is produced by myself and Heidi Hedquist. Our reluctant producers are John Sauvé and Sandy Stone. Our willing producers are Rachel Allen and Randy Jeanette. Our intern is Zach Jackson. This one's for Philippe. Thank you, good night, and may all your favorite bands stay together.